Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where, once again, I find myself wondering whether we really should have I Got You Babe by Sonny and Cher pucking away in the background as we begin our contemplations of what feels like yet another Groundhog Day. Although, I guess, in a sense, the deck chairs on the deck have been rearranged slightly. It would appear that the ship is still sinking, but which ship? The ship of Brexit or the ship of Great Britain? It seems to be boiling down to a fairly stark choice between the two. And those of us persuaded that it is the ship of Great Britain that is sinking and the ship of Brexit that perhaps will float, can only conclude thus after watching the Prime Minister pander and bow once again to the people that caused this mess. It's quite incredible. And although I'm not a full-time student of modern politics, I don't think anybody gets it. So I'd like to have a crack at explaining that first. If you look at what Theresa May's biggest mistake has been since the very beginning, I think that it is the, to me, almost inexplicable decision to throw all of her weight behind whether you want to say the 52%, I don't think is right. The thing that's really getting to me now, and in an intellectual way rather than an emotional way, we'll get onto the stuff that's getting to me emotionally perhaps a little later in the programme, but this, I know lots and lots of people. I wouldn't be surprised if I really put my mind to it, if I could get up into I'd probably be knocking at the door of actually being able to name 100 individuals in my life, whether they are people that I see every day, colleagues and friends, whether they are old schoolmates on Facebook, whether they are neighbours, family members. I think I'd get close to 100 people I know who voted to leave, who genuinely thought that we would be, in terms of trade and trade alone, utterly unaffected. The problem now with the next sentence in this paragraph is at what point you feel, if I've just described you, at what point do you feel patronised? And I don't want to patronise anybody, but it was Dan Hodges actually on the Mail on Sunday. We had a very fruitful, fertile exchange on Twitter yesterday. I enjoyed his column yesterday. It seemed to me to be a call for a second referendum, although even I'm not arrogant enough to tell a journalist what he really meant to write, despite the fact he didn't realise that's what he was writing himself. So we had a little sort of amusing exchange together, culminating in me saying, I think that is actually, when you read it, it's a call for a second referendum. And he replied, so I must read it again, which I thought was a very cool way of also having a disagreement on social media without biting chunks out of each other is strangely refreshing. But anyway, we digress. The point I'm dancing around today, and possibly I'm just about to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic instead of focusing upon the iceberg, but given that a significant number of people in the country, whether they're listening to this programme or not, are still insisting that it's not an iceberg, it's a sunny upland, it just looks like an iceberg, you wonder whether you're wasting your time shouting iceberg. I mean, shouting iceberg for the best part of 3 years. We've hit it and we're sinking, and everyone's claiming it's the fault of the people who shouted iceberg, as opposed to the people who said there is no iceberg. But we digress. If I say we digress again before 10:15, give me a yellow card, all right? So that's the point for me. And I'm fascinated, much more interested now. I apologise if this offends you. I'm much more interested in sensible people who voted leave than I am in anybody else. And I'm not going to apologise for using the word sensible, because there will be insensible people on both sides. But the sensible people who voted leave are the most interesting to me, because several things seem to be happening that I am profoundly concerned by as a Democrat. Key among them is the utter misrepresentation of the past. Because the only way you can corrupt the present and the future is by misrepresenting or corrupting the past. And the idea that everybody who voted to leave the European Union knew that we would be leaving the customs union and or the single market. And for the avoidance of confusion, let's just focus on the single market first this morning. Well, I know that's not true because of the 100 people I could name now. Right? People who... I don't mean that the gotcha clips of politicians saying things like absolutely nobody is talking about leaving the single market, or only a madman would leave the single market, or the The claim that there's no earthly way that Italian Prosecco makers or French vineyards or German car, German car manufacturers, there's no earthly way that they would allow the terms of trade that we have with them to be changed. Now, I don't want you to laugh at me, but the reason why I wasn't absolutely out there in the run-up to the referendum is twofold. The first, as you know, is whether I look back on this with regret in years to come, I don't know. But I had a tiny little sideline at the time working over at the BBC, and their impartiality requirements in work that I did elsewhere, i.e. here, and believe it or not, on Twitter, which isn't even work, they sort of clipped my wings, but I enjoyed that. I thought this is such an important time. It may be quite good to be above the fray. So I leant towards Remaining. But the reason why I didn't put all my chips on Remain is only partly because of that impartiality. That would be a cop-out on my part. That would be quite a self-serving rewriting of the past. The main reason I didn't put all my chips on Remain is I thought some of the stuff that the Leave lot said might be true. And key among them was that argument about industry. The idea, when you think about it, there's an ineluctable logic to the notion that if I am a massive customer of yours, then you're going to do whatever you can to make sure that my level of custom remains the same. So I don't know if I'm apologising to people. I'm not apologising. No, I think even the people that said it would be easy, some of them deserve an apology. I've gone further down the road of castigation and condemnation than most in the last 3 years. But now's the time. It's probably too late, but now's the time, surely, for bridge building and for an attempt at some sort of harmony, even though I passionately believe we now need another referendum. I think Parliament have dropped the ball so spectacularly and government have made such an almighty mess of everything, either whether it was inevitable or not doesn't matter. The people now deserve to be consulted. But, and you'll know if you listen to this programme on a regular basis, as recently as Christmas, I was not in favour of a second referendum, but I can't see any wisdom at all in leaving this now, the damage limitation, if you want, or the acceleration of the madness, leaving it to men who almost entirely have been shown to be wrong about what they said during the campaigns, either misrepresenting or misunderstanding EU membership. The idea that they now get given the steering wheel or get given even more of the steering wheel than they had before is frightening in many ways. But just on that trade issue, I think we've missed it, between us. I think the most important people in the context of the referendum are not the racists and the bigots and the people who saluted that despicable Breaking Point poster. The most important people are the ones who held their nose about the company they were being compelled to keep. And so they were entitled to, You look at that disgusting Breaking Point poster and I look at you and say, how on earth could you get into bed with him? How on earth could you get into bed with that thinking? And you, I think quite rightly, could turn around to me and said, I didn't get into bed with him. That's a bit like going to a football match, sitting in row F, there's a massive fight in row A, and you're going to try and blame it on me. I happened to be supporting the same team for very different reasons. So then you start looking at what those reasons are. And key among them is that claim that the German car industry and the French winemakers and the Italian Prosecco makers are not going to countenance any significant change to the trading terms currently enjoyed by one of their biggest customers. And I think that's actually a really powerful argument. Not anymore, now we know the truth. But back then, if you believed that, I don't think you've got anything to apologise for. Or no, why wouldn't you believe that? Why didn't I believe it? Answer, because I was a little bit blinded by the personnel, as you know, the people on the other side of the argument. And, of course, as we saw some of the vilest things that public life in Britain has ever seen in my lifetime, that Breaking Point poster in particular, I found it impossible to understand how anybody could march alongside that kind of monstrousness. And it means I missed a point a bit because I'm too immersed in it. You're not, you know? You could look at that and say, well, look, we knew they were disgusting people. It doesn't mean that my desire to leave the European Union is wrong. And what I've done since the march at the weekend, which I found to be a profound experience, actually. There is something really beautiful about hundreds of thousands of people coming together to promote harmony, to promote fellow feeling, universality, to reach out. I mean, I spoke, I don't know if you're aware, I was the first speaker on the stage in Parliament Square, and it's not often I get the gulp anymore. You know, when you have to do public speaking and you gulp in the middle of a word for reasons you never understand because of the nerves, it doesn't really happen to me anymore. But it did then. And I was at great pains to describe the people who voted to leave as our friends and our family. They're my friends and my family, my colleagues. Then I got a little bit Henry V, which I think is the first time I've ever been in front of a crowd like that, and something a bit weird happens to you. You could suddenly sort of imagine yourself when you feel the roars come back at you, or the applause or the cheers. That you need, crikey, you need the WASIC alarm in your ear at that point, saying, "Don't get carried away, mate." If you don't know what a WASIC alarm is, you need to download the podcast of Friday's show. So you hear the roar come back at you, and you go a bit weird. So I said a thing, right? Don't laugh. I said a phrase which, in retrospect, makes me cringe. So I started listing to this thing, the people who voted to leave. They are our friends, they are our family, they are our colleagues. And it's getting such a lovely response from the crowd that I did this rhetorical thing I don't think I've done since school, and I just reached for a phrase. So I found myself standing in Parliament Square on Saturday, addressing everybody there. And of course, cameras and all that sort of thing. I said, they are our friends, they are our family. And then I said this line, they are our cousins and our kin. And as the last word came out of my mouth, kin, I thought, oh, mate, don't get the giggles now. But there was a curious mixture of, I felt profoundly moved. I make no apology for that. And sometimes I guess when I get moved, I get a bit highfalutin. And then by dint of the fact I had a microphone in my hand and tens of thousands of people standing in front of me, I went even more highfalutin than I've ever gone before. But do you know what? I really mean it. They are our cousins and our kin. This wedge of division that they insist on continuing to try to drive between us is absurd. Membership of the European Union is not as important as our friendships and our relationships and our love for each other. And the people who seem to peddle the hate and the anger and the division and the nasties, the people who even if we left 2 years ago, they'd still be full of anger and hate. They just have moved on to something else. It's who they are. It's all they know. It's what they do. I think we focus too hard on them. So surely, when you look in the rearview mirror and you look back at 2016, surely the single most significant constituency now, in the context of a second referendum, are the people who thought that leaving would be quite easy. And more importantly, our cousins and our kin, honestly. More importantly, it's the people who just thought it was true that massive interests like German automotive or French wine would somehow insist that we could carry on trading in the way that we do now. I didn't understand that their opinion was more or less meaningless in the context of the politics. I didn't get that. It made sense to me. Looking back, I can see why it made sense to you. So, touch wood, that's who I'd like to talk to today. If you cast your vote because you genuinely believed we'd be able to carry on trading just as we are now, and against that backdrop, words like independence and sovereignty assumed some sort of magical status in your mind, give me a call, tell me how you feel now. Now you know that we won't be able to carry on trading in the way that they insisted that we would and told us would be easy. Aren't you the people who most deserve a second vote? Maybe. Just a thought. I'm not going to get all sackcloth and ashes, but I had a bit of a moment on Saturday on the stage at the People's Vote rally, a genuine moment, and I love my country. I love almost all of the people in it in some sense. It just occurred to me that we've ignored the people who don't have loud voices on both sides. I've got one of the loudest voices on the Remain side. But people on the Leave side who simply believed things that actually aren't monstrous lies or terrible manipulations or Russian-funded propaganda. They were quite logical, I realised on Saturday. Quite easy to believe. Of course, look at the German. How many cars does Germany sell into this country? So somebody turns around to you and says, well, there's no earthly way they're going to stand for any change in that scenario. You'd go, yeah, that makes sense. I get that. I guess what I've been doing over the weekend is wondering in what circumstances I could have voted to leave. And there's quite a lot, amazingly, on that side. But it's all turned out to be wrong. Not dishonest or deceptive. The people still saying the same things are dishonest and deceptive and deceitful, and mostly at Chequers this weekend. But the people who believed it the first time round did absolutely nothing wrong. How do I know that? Because I could easily have believed it as well when you think about it. French wine, you walk into Budgeon's or Sainsbury's. How much of the wine is French? Do you really think that they are going to allow anything to put obstacles in that course? That doesn't mean that you get freaked out when people speak foreign on trains, or that you've got a problem with Christian charity in the context of the world's most vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you're going to start sending death threats and hate mail to female MPs. It just means you thought, yeah, actually, these nebulous issues like sovereignty and independence are powerful. They're emotionally powerful. And if we get them without damaging any of the measurable stuff like trade and economics, then yeah, why not? Let's give it a whirl. Let's see what happens. Result, 52-48. So who most deserves another vote? People who thought it would be easy because they believed the professionals who told them that it would be. Daniel's in Newcastle. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Where do you start? Do you know, I feel like sometimes I should apologise for voting Leave because I would consider myself one of the sensible Leavers.
Yes.
But now that we're more educated on the matter, we should definitely be allowed the chance for a second referendum because, one, we're more educated. Two, it doesn't appear to be getting any better than they made out to. Like,
it's getting worse. Yeah, it's getting worse.
Exactly.
And they keep telling you, this is the bit where I get actually cross on your behalf. I hope you don't feel that that's patronising. They keep telling you that you voted for this.
I didn't vote.
No, you didn't, but they keep telling you that you did. And when I say no, he didn't, they say, well, this is why Remain won. It's this smug, arrogant attitude, telling people what they do and don't know. I know that you didn't vote for this because nobody told you that this was going to happen. Yeah. So literally nobody voted for this. I'm
sick of this term, the will of the people.
Oh, me too.
Like, any normal thinking logical person would think actually this like I've said the producer there, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Yeah. I work for a German manufacturing company.
Well, you think it? Oh, I've done it again. Of course you thought that there's no way they'd allow anything to happen that would damage their supply chains into this country. ...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if anything, the North East used to be a massive industrial part of the world. That went by the wayside, and I just thought, could that come back? And selfishly, that would improve my business and whatnot. But it's bigger than that. It's look at the supply chain into Nissan, for example.
Yeah.
Like Nissan, they've lost the X-Trail job. That isn't the end of the world because the business will continue. I think 1 in 4 cars from Sunderland, 1 in 4 Nissans in Europe are from Sunderland. So that's right. Quite a high average.
Well, if we crash out with no deal, mate, it's game over for that. It genuinely is. We've seen the tariffs that would be put in place immediately.
You've got to think of all the small men working in their little unit garages in a little industrial estate that feed into the likes of those people. It's easy to think, oh, well, Nissan will be all right, they're worth billions, but you've got 3,000 people. It might be 3,000. I'm not right.
You made a great point because in the run-up to the vote, you're looking at the size of the German car industry. Oh, not even the car industry. You're looking at the size of the market for continentally produced cars in this country, and you're thinking, well, that's too huge for anybody to allow it to be messed with, or for circumstances to interfere with it. Turns out we were wrong. It was not too big to change. It is going to have to change because Brexit is about politics as much as it's about economics. And now we're looking at, I bet, a lot of people in the northeast. I think I almost did a little homage to you there with my accent by accident. a lot of people in the northeast. I don't know where that came from. A lot of people in the northeast are presumably looking at Nissan and Toyota and elsewhere in the country, and they're thinking, no, it's simply too huge. It's too much a part of our fabric of our shared existence. They can't. It's too big to change. And the lesson we've learned from Brexit is that nothing's too big to get changed by events.
And then just wait till you see the headline in the Sunderland Echo or whatever, Nissan to cut X amount of jobs. And then that's when, for want of a better word, will hit the fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you mean. The proverbial will hit the fan. And the people who are now saying that you voted for this will say, when that happens, it's got nothing to do with Brexit. And you know, diesel has played a part in some of the decisions that have been taken by car manufacturers. But if you honestly look at the facts and you think that a company is going to carry on manufacturing in a country where it can't have a just-in-time supply chain and where it has enormous tariffs slapped on anything that it seeks to export, is, well, they're just going to move production over the channel, aren't they? I mean, you can swim it. It's only Dominic Raab who doesn't understand the importance of the Dover-Calais crossing. Everybody else can simply look at a map and work it out for themselves. Yeah, and go away from manufacturing for a second, if that's all right. I've got a colleague who lives in Northern Ireland. Yeah. Not once did I think about him. Like, we work for the same company, obviously, but it wasn't really spoke about. See, we need you. You should have had you on the stage on Saturday. You work in the northeast for a German manufacturing company. Your vote to leave the European Union is actually sensible. I understand it. It's only events that have rendered it wrong. Possibly even ridiculous, but I don't think today's the day to reach for that word. Events have rendered you wrong. And what you have been shown to be wrong about was stuff that very important, very plausible, very professional people with monocles and top hats and double-barreled names and columns in the Telegraph and parties at the Ritz, they told you, and I would have believed them as well if the sun had come up in a slightly different place that day. They told you it would be really, really easy and that there's no way any of the things that we currently take for granted would be compromised. Well, now we know. It's really, really hard. And lots of the things that we take for granted will be compromised. How can you not go back to the people against that backdrop of fact from the metropolitan liberal elite that is Daniel in Newcastle? Of interventions from key players in the public discourse surrounding, in the context of this morning's conversation, of course, Brexit. This is what Robert Peston has to say about Boris Johnson's column in the Telegraph. Telegraph, of course, owned by the man who owned the Ritz, and nothing says down with the elites like owning the Ritz. Having now read Johnson's column in the Telegraph, Robert Peston writes, ITV's political editor, and for my money, one of the sharpest knives in the political journalist's drawer. It is clear to me he is preparing ground for the mother of all U-turns, and that he is poised to support Theresa May's deal if she brings it back for a third meaningful vote, so long as she commits to resign after the deal is ratified. No confirmation one way or the other of either that analysis or the likelihood of it happening, but Peston's a fairly doughty discerner of the shifts, the ebb and flow of politics. And, I mean, on the other hand, of course, he's suggesting that Boris Johnson will embark upon an exercise of almost unbridled hypocrisy. Boris Johnson will do the polar opposite of what he insisted was unconscionable and unthinkable only yesterday, to which most of us will respond by going, well, yeah, it's Boris Johnson, mate. Shows the bridge. But Jess Phillips has responded to that, a Labour MP who pretty much at the moment seems to personify principle and putting principle ahead of personal advancement. And she's written on Twitter, I wanted to be a politician because I wanted to rebuild faith in politics. I wanted to change the you're all the same, all out for yourselves. I was incredibly naive. It is all just ambitious, entitled boys playing games with toy soldiers. I feel sick. Gove and Johnson, the two co-chairs of the Vote Leave campaign, were at Chequers at the weekend trying to thrash out what happens next when the two co-chairs of the Vote Leave campaign couldn't even agree on whether or not the withdrawal agreement, i.e. the terms of our leaving, should go through Parliament. If Johnson changes horses now, I don't think it will make the blindest bit of difference to how he is seen by the public. I really don't. And just have a quick hop and skip and a jump over the Atlantic to see how this kind of politics works. It's not a coincidence that Johnson's been knocking about with Steve Bannon. Donald Trump this morning receives what is, I think, under any analysis, good news or relieving news from the Mueller report, which means that the system has not exonerated him, as he claims, quite the opposite, according to the Attorney General's précis of the report. But on the question of Russian collusion, they've found no evidence, right? Which means the system, which is rules-based, evidence-based, accountable, transparent and independent in the case of this FBI investigation, and I think it's fair to say efforts were made to make it none of those things, the system has delivered him good news, but he still attacks the system because rules-based, evidence-based, transparent, accountable, all of those things he despises. So even when the system works in his favour, he can't help attacking the system because he hates scrutiny and he hates being checked. Also, what he's brilliant at is this move of the spotlight away from the fact that his campaign team was riddled with criminality, clearly, and criminals. You know, people going to jail who were in his inner circle, but no one's talking about that. No one's talking about the fact that the Russians, for reasons that Donald Trump's supporters have to work out, I know why, but they need to work it out for themselves. Why would the Russians be so keen to offer to help him? You'd ask yourself that question, wouldn't you? And you know, when Al Gore received anonymously in the Post confidential information about, it would be George W. Bush's campaign, wouldn't it? Do you know what he did? The first thing he did? He phoned the FBI. When Donald Trump Jr. was offered a meeting with Russians offering to help their election project, what was the first thing he did? He went to the meeting. So criminality and morality, two very different things. But anyway, back to Brexit. I think the people who most deserve another vote, and I don't really want one, I'd rather see Parliament revoke Article 50, actually, but I think that's probably too much to hope for, are the people who simply believed non-toxic, non-racist, non-divisive statements and claims that have turned out not to be true. Most obviously, our trade won't be affected. We'll be fine. There's no way the German car industry or the French winemakers would countenance root and branch change to our trading arrangements. So you believed that. I didn't understand the integrity of the four freedoms and how important it was to the sustainability of the European Union, the protection of the European Union. I didn't get that. You tell me now, look back, just blink a bit. Do you really think BMW are going to allow a political change to knock the stuffing out of their access to the British? No, of course I don't. No shame in that. But you were wrong. Not your fault you were wrong. They were wrong. People who told you it would be easy have turned out to be wrong. They won't admit it yet, but you can. Thomas is in Swansea. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate. Sorry. I went off on one. I don't know how Donald Trump came out of into the proceedings. Let's steer me back to Brexit, please.
Oh, don't get me started on Donald Trump. Okay, yeah, so I voted Leave.
Yes.
And my wife voted Leave. At the time, I don't think we were fully in the realm of knowing the full structure of the European Union.
Oh,
and now that I look back at it,
yeah,
my vote was a Westminster protest vote.
Yes.
I looked around the country, you know, I've seen on one of your shows, house prizes, 8 times higher than they were 20 years ago.
Yes.
And, you know, infrastructure, things are crumbling, work needs doing, the NHS. I was thinking, right, the only way things can get better, it was a gamble. Do you know what I mean? It was like playing poker. You know, we can have a gamble and, you know, things could get better.
I don't know, even that, I think poker, it was more like, I don't want to carry on like this, and the only offer I've received in recent years for what would feel like a really big change is this one.
Yeah, but now when I look back at it, I realise we've been playing Russian roulette.
You're going to stay with your games, aren't you, on this one? We've gone from poker to Russian roulette. I like it. You're right, actually.
It's Russian roulette. And the way, I mean, my obligation as a father and a parent is to leave this country better than I found it for my kids. And when I listen to the Brexiteers now, like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage yesterday, we're still dealing in hypotheticals.
Yes,
we can't
that's all they will ever have. The only question the country faces now is, will we discover that the Emperor... Will they finally be forced to admit that the Emperor had no clothes on after the country's gone off a cliff, or will we somehow be able to stop going off a cliff and then they never have to admit it and they can carry on heckling and throwing rotten tomatoes from the sidelines for the rest of their miserable lives?
Well, I thought from your book, well, maybe the only way to deal with this is a no-deal Brexit, because then the reality will set in and the people around the country will realise, wait, we got it wrong.
Yes.
I mean, admittedly, it'll be too late, but at least that might unite the country again into realising this was wrong. But now I think of it and I think, no, we'll just find something else
so
to turn the head towards.
But look at what they're doing this week. It's all Theresa May's fault. I feel no sympathy at all for the woman, but she has literally been trying to operate in the straitjacket they laced her into, and now they're chucking her under a bus for not being able to produce a rabbit out of her hat.
Yeah, and if we leave on no deal and things get a lot worse, it'll be the European Union's fault. Well, they shouldn't have allowed this to happen.
Absolutely, that or Remainers' fault, or I don't know, the political establishment fault. It'll be the elites' fault, and they'll be writing their columns in the newspaper owned by the owners of the Ritz about how the elites are all to blame for the mess that's happened as a result of the things they said wouldn't be a mess, and all the people you should really be blaming are the ones who told you it would be a mess. It's madness. But I like today's. I appreciate I've not exactly been bombarding my listeners with callers. I'll squeeze in a lot more before 1 o'clock, I promise. But you and I, we shouldn't be enemies, on any page or on any stage. And I know you've now changed your mind, so it's easy to say that we shouldn't be enemies, but I shouldn't hold any ill will towards you for what you did in June 2016, because a point that I've perhaps not made often enough is what you did was logical.
Yeah, but I think my main point on it would be the ill will has to stop and people need to just grow up a little bit.
Yes.
And we need to realise that, like I said, we're leaving this country for our kids. And now is not the time for pettiness and squabbling. It's the time for people to get back together and sort the country out.
To double down on the denial. And if we're going to get back together and start trying to pull away from this period of horribleness, this period of profound pain and unpleasantness, then ideally we'll do so in the best available economic circumstances. And now we know what they are. We weren't sure before. We know as if we want to keep manufacturing, if we want to keep agriculture, don't take my word for it, ask the economists for Brexit. If you want to keep manufacturing and agriculture, you don't crash out with no deal. You don't, ideally, even Brexit at all.
The last point I would probably make before I go is this. I see a lot of people going on about leave, and, leave means leave, and this, that, and the other. I mean, what strikes me is that, the first thing is, when you've got Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, and one supports the withdrawal agreement, but one doesn't,
I know.
There's no unified leave.
No, doesn't mean anything.
We can already shout, 17.4 million, but those two people alone are showing that 17.4 million people had different views.
You're such a sneering, condescending metropolitan elite, Thomas. Honestly, I don't know how you sleep at night.
But it is. I mean, it's the democracy argument, though. I just don't get it.
No, do I. Which people? Well, this is it. The will of the people. We hear it every single day. We hear it 10 times a day. Do you know what we never hear, Thomas, the point you've just made? The will of which people?
It is the will of which people.
The will of which people?
You're on about, being condescending from Dominic Raab, who, I mean, anybody who's done geography in school knows Dover's Catholic. But anyway, if I find it condescending for a government to say to me that I can't change my mind in 3 years, yet they're allowed to have 3 votes on a withdrawal agreement in 1 month, just in case they change their mind. Now, that is condescending.
Stick that on the side of a bus. And you put it beautifully. You put it absolutely beautifully. It's 10:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are doing something that we probably should have done a long time ago, which is just to say there were a million reasons to vote to leave the European Union in June of 2016, and it is not the fault of any of those voters that the reasons turned out not to be true. They could easily have been true. The more you think about it, the more plausible it is that some of these massive industrial vested interests would not countenance any root and branch change to their trading arrangements. But it turns out the people that said they wouldn't, the people that said that they wouldn't be able to stop it or influence it, that the German car industry would have no say over what Angela Merkel did to protect the European Union, turns out they were right. But I think it's not impossible to conceive of circumstances in which they could have been wrong. So both of my callers today, Leave voters, decent people, facts have changed, so have their minds. It's 10 to 11 already. I do apologise. We should crack on. I will speak to at least everybody currently queued up in my... this is like my little operation... What's it called? Where they're going to have all those lorries queued up at Dover? Operation... Come on. What's it called? Operation Stack. So I would like to apologise to Jeffrey in Gravesend, Dredge in Bristol, Sarah in Christchurch, Peter in Brighton, Philip in Shrewsbury, Andy in Stamford, Paul in Croydon, John in Glasgow, Philip in Hatfield, and others for not having got to you sooner. This is my own little Operation Stack. Sarah's in Christchurch. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First time called as the radio, so I'm a bit nervous.
You're very welcome. Nothing happens. It's just like another phone call. You just happen to have more people listening in.
So I came to the march on Saturday. Unfortunately, didn't see you.
Oh.
I'm a Remainer. Well, couldn't get anywhere near because of the numbers of people.
Yeah, it's mad.
But in terms of me kind of having my change, I guess that was around sort of October last year. I'd started to feel really uncomfortable about voting Leave then, but kind of my real, there are lots of other reasons I could give, but kind of my eureka moment was when it all sort of started to come out about the backstop, which was around then when that started to, widely sort of go out in the press, and that really panicked me. And had I been aware of that and understood it, there's no way I would have voted Leave. I mean, there's absolutely no way I would have done.
We've created the wrong forum, haven't we, since it happened? People like me are to blame for this as well, getting very upset and feeling very angry, so that people like you probably wouldn't have wanted to come near me for a year afterwards.
No, that's true.
I think it's time for a little bit more holding of hands, Sarah.
Yes. So, I mean, I grew up in Farnborough near Aldershot. We had an Aldershot bombing, the bombing in Guildford. And as a child, I kind of grew up fearful. And I'm not suggesting we're going to go back to those sorts of things for 1 minute, but listening to your radio station, other stations, hearing people in Ireland, just how scared and how worried they are.
And they genuinely are. I mean, you'll be able to find a couple who aren't, but the fact remains that the majority, it would seem, are, and of course the majority in Northern Ireland voted to remain anyway. And what was it that you liked the look of when you voted to leave? Because the more I look back, the more I sort of realise, in many ways, as we've demonstrated today with the stuff about German car industries and French wine, their most powerful arguments seemed to be things won't change at all, but will feel different.
I think that's true. I mean, I'm a little bit uncomfortable saying that I was kind of, I think, sticking two fingers up a bit of the establishment.
Yes.
Feeling quite unhappy.
Yeah, really joining with the owners of the Ritz to teach the establishment a lesson, Sarah.
and just feeling.
Yeah. No, of course you were.
Just a feeling of being almost wanting to feel British, some sort of sense of not feeling very European, and going along on Saturday, I couldn't have felt more different. I couldn't have felt more patriotic and more British.
Same here.
And one other thing I think that really started to hit me, I mean, that was way before October last year, was just the sheer hate towards people who, in this country, who either are non-British or appear to look non-British. Just the level of hate towards them,
and the validation that people like that seem to have received from the Brexit vote, which is not your fault.
Yes.
It's not what you voted for, and even if you happen to have voted on the same side as them, there's no way, if you're sitting in row F, that you are held responsible for the vile hooligans in row A. It would be insane to suggest that you are.
I don't want to associate myself with people like that. I understood about the movement of people would still carry on and so on.
Well, most of the Leave voters I know didn't vote on that grounds. They thought free movement of people would carry on. And I used to say, but hang on, why are all the people who are obsessed with immigration, who do complain about people speaking foreign on trains, despite the fact that his own wife speaks German to his own children in public, why are you getting into bed with them if they so clearly do care only about foreigners? But it's too late now. You voted because of your perceptions and beliefs, and some of the things you believed at the time turned out not to be true. That's just normal. That's being human. It's being alive. It's having your head not in the clouds. Saturday was great. I wish our paths had crossed, Sarah, although it was a fairly crowded field. 10:55 is the time. 03456060973. I'll stay with this for as long as the phones keep ringing. I think today it's a bit of a different day. And also, I can't do any political analysis because I've got nothing really to go on, except the rather tragic and frightening fact that the people responsible for this mess are the people that Theresa May elected to invite to Chequers this weekend. She didn't invite any women, incidentally. But more pertinently, she didn't invite anybody who realistically represents the thoughts not only of the 48% who voted to remain, but the whatever percent who voted to leave and now would quite like the opportunity to change their mind in public, which Theresa May has now offered to MPs twice. Dredge is in Bristol. Dredge, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm not sure if you remember, there was a guy who phoned you the day after the referendum and told you he changed his mind and he regretted it. Do you know who that was?
It was you, was it?
It was me.
I'm not Sherlock Holmes. There was more than one, but
I was the first one, though. I was definitely the first one.
I'm not going to doubt you. The reasons we were given, and I can't remember whether this was you, was that you wanted to send a message to Westminster, but you didn't actually expect to win.
It was a very complex thing.
Of course.
I didn't like the austerity, the inequality, Osborne, Cameron. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I thought, take a punt, be like the guy said before, you take a gamble. I thought, well, it would just cause of confusion, and we'll hopefully have a second one. When I suggested to you, we'll hopefully have another one, you sort of laughed at me. And you weren't actually that nice to me in those days because you just thought guy who voted Leave was just a fool, which in a way I was.
Did you just say I wasn't very nice to you?
I thought at that point, and quite rightly, but I was really not clear. I understand now why I voted, but I've regretted ever since.
Well, I'm sorry that I wasn't nice to you. I mean...
it's changed, hasn't it?
Well, of course it has, and I mean, I've changed clearly, because I would have laughed at you if you'd suggested a second referendum nearly 3 years ago. I thought that after a year or so, we'd have a clearer idea of what was going on. Some of it would involve sucking up ideal case scenarios, but some of it, for people like you, would make it worthwhile. The stuff we will gain will make the stuff that we lose worthwhile. But when I put those words out there, they're so far away from reality and the truth. I don't know why anyone else is still on the other side. I really don't.
I was hoping, things would get better, but little did I realise, obviously, that the potential of things getting much worse, that was a danger as well. So, it was a big mistake. I've regretted it ever since. My wife told me, don't do it, you will spend 10 years leaving the EU, and she was very right about it. And so I'm hoping, I thought, in Ireland they've had 3, so I was thinking, it's a difficult one, hopefully we'll have another one.
Yeah, well, the island, the casting of the vote in Ireland came after the treaty had been rewritten, so the problems that were identified by both the Irish government and their partners in the European Union were directly addressed by treaty changes, which is why it got passed the second time. But of course, if you were still falling for the simplistic arguments of the Leave side, then you'd be hearing when I say the grievances of the Irish people were addressed by the Irish government and their partners in European Union and were recognised in treaty changes, which meant that the next time it was put to the people it was passed. That's a statement of fact. If I was working for the Leave campaign, even now, I'd say, are you just going to keep asking the same question until you get the answer that you want then? Which has happened never. It didn't happen in Norway, it hasn't happened in Ireland, it never happened. But that doesn't matter, does it? Because you say things that have never happened and will never happen, and you say that they have happened and they will happen, and people believe you, and that's how you get them to vote potentially against their own interests. So, what's never going to happen? Well, the German car industry are never going to allow their access to the UK market to be compromised or changed in any way whatsoever. That's never going to happen. If you believed that, and whatever it was you thought you were getting in the plus column, the fact that that column was staying the same means that your vote was made under false pretenses, which is why you, more than anyone, deserve another vote. Who deserves another vote? Probably the people that don't want one, actually, if you were to be really obtuse and Brexity about it. But the odd thing about the People's Vote March on Saturday, which I was at the heart of, was the absolute absence of rancour. I even saw a few Leave people with their banners, and in fact, I think the ugliest bit of the postscript, especially given that her husband is agitating once again to be Prime Minister, was probably Michael Gove's wife, Sarah Vine, who I have met once. We did a BBC programme together a couple of months ago, and I rather liked her. But when she elected to tweet about how there'd be no Leavers there because they would get lynched, I thought that's really unhelpful. And that was part of the reason, oddly, that I spent much of yesterday trying to work out ways in which we can diffuse that sort of rhetoric. I saw Leave voters there. Nobody was going to get lynched. I saw Leave banners. I saw Leave posters. In fact, the only aggro I encountered all day was from a strange fellow who kept sticking his phone in my face, asking me questions that I'd already answered from the stage. So when I said, I've already answered these questions in my speech, he said, I don't give a... And then he used a rather rude word, boys and girls. He said, I don't give a fig about your speech. And I sort of thought, well, why are you here then? I don't quite get that. But somebody explained that he might have been one of those people that posts social media stuff and then asks for donations. I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. But that was the only aggro I saw all day. And it very much wasn't directed at Leave campaigners who'd elected to come along. There were a couple outside Westminster Tube with banners, quite young, and they were in sort of country-style clothes. I can see them now. And then there were pictures all over social media. So when Sarah Vine said nobody went because they'd get lynched, I mean, that's really vile and violent language from a woman who is married to one of the men reported at the weekend to be jostling for prime ministerial position. So I sort of thought, well, if that... I don't know what conversations go on in the Gove family home, but it's hard to imagine that he's there saying we must all be nicer to each other and we've really got to dial down the division and the divisiveness. He's saying that while his wife and key cheerleader is saying, oh, well, Leavers couldn't go into London yesterday because they would have been murdered. Well, they really, really wouldn't. I don't think I will ever be in a crowd. And remember, I was in the early days of the rave movement in the late 80s and early 90s, but I don't think I've ever felt as much love in a crowd as I felt in central London yesterday, and that is really saying something. The point being, of course, that Gove is one of the people that secured votes by saying things that have turned out not to be true. So rather than turn around and say, I'd like to apologise to everyone who voted to leave as a result of some of the things my husband said, Sarah Vine elects to turn around and say, some of those people who voted to leave because of things my husband said that have turned out not to be true, they'd get murdered if they went into London today. So it's not hard to see where responsibility would lie for the fact that they voted under false pretences or under a mistaken belief. But to suggest that they would get murdered, I genuinely, it's not often you double take at social media, but I did then. 7 minutes after 11, the idea that lots of things the Leave campaign said could easily have been believed, therefore now we know that they weren't true. Surely that's the most powerful argument available for a second referendum, for an informed referendum, for a third referendum, for a people's vote, for a loser's vote. You can call it whatever you want. But the question remains the same. They said X, Y, and Z. You believed X, Y, and Z. I think it was very easy to believe X, Y, and Z. Doesn't make you racist or stupid or both or either. But now we know that X, Y, and Z are not true. You, more than anyone, deserve another crack of the whip. You might have found lots of reasons to still support Brexit, but the fact remains that the reasons you had when you did last time turned out not to be sound. And when the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? Arthur's in York. Arthur, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've been listening for a bit, as in a few months, but this is my first time calling, so
you're very welcome.
Pretty excited.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
So yeah, I basically very much identify with the people that have come on today, but I was also too young to vote at the time. I'm 19 now, and I was 16 back then. So I feel a lot of anxiety with what's happening, and I was a Leave supporter for the reasons that you've mentioned in the past.
The trade, because you weren't looking to stop freedom of movement, but you did think that a Norway-type arrangement could allow us, in some sense, to retain all the benefits of what we already had and go out and find new things that we couldn't do as part of a bloc as big as the EU. We could turn on a sixpence, we could be more efficient and faster, which makes sense. But I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm just trying to work out what I've said before that you might be referring to.
No, you're right. Like, for example, I remember he's no longer an MP, but it's a lord now. Peter Lilly. Yeah. He spoke to my school. He was my representative in Parliament. Right. And he spoke about the ideas that Britain was being chained down to this protectionist bloc. And I felt like, I believe that I felt that my the country's potential was being held back.
Yes.
And then the sort of the talk about sovereignty and the undemocratic EU and so on. It felt like this was an opportunity to
Powerful draft that you drank, served up by Peter Lilly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't just it wasn't just him.
No,
of course,
I know.
Yeah. But that was the picture that was painted, and I think it might have been also because I was 16 at the time. I didn't have a political philosophy of my own yet, but it was very persuasive, and I remember a lot of my friends and a lot of the people that I spoke to found it weird that I was supporting Leave when I have an immigrant background.
But you separated the two, which in many ways the public discourse didn't let you do, and I'm not ready yet to work out why that was. But Leave wouldn't have got over the line without the racist vote. But the idea that everybody who voted to Leave was comfortable with the racist vote has been absurd all along. But the only people that keep insisting on trying to conflate you with the racists are the Leave campaigners, who say that people like me call everyone like you a racist, even though I sit here every day and say, obviously, my friends and family who voted to leave the European Union don't have a racist bone in their body.
Yeah, yes, exactly that. And
what made you wobble? When did the needle first start moving, Arthur?
I think the biggest, what is so telling is the change in the rhetoric.
Yes.
So when people were campaigning for Brexit, there was a lot of hopeful language, a lot of potential. We can do this, we can do that.
Sunny uplands, have our cake and eat it. There was a triumphalist air to some of the rhetoric, wasn't it? As if we were going to shrug off the shackles and march to a brave new dawn.
Yeah, that transition to what we see now, which is sort of like damage limitation. Oh, it's not going to be that bad. We're going to, it's worth the 50 years of hardship.
We survived the Blitz.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite a change, isn't it? Now you come to mention it.
And I just, thinking in my head, I found it increasingly difficult to defend the Leave argument. And I think that there was a slow transition, but I remember you saying it on the Romaniacs podcast. I was actually like excited when I did change my mind.
Yeah, it's liberating, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And I found it. I felt a bit embarrassed coming to my friends and like saying that I changed my mind, but they were they were very accepting and open, and I thought I'd be ridiculed and so on, being like...
Could have been worse, Arthur. You could have actually voted.
So, I basically, with my mind change and now so on, it feels like I'm being pulled into traffic.
Do you know by the people that told you all the things that you've subsequently decided probably weren't true or definitely weren't true? Do you know what has happened here? While you've been talking, I've been desperately trying to think of the fairy tale or the children's story where everyone thinks that the character is terrifying and evil. I've got the Gruffalo in the back of my mind, but I think the Gruffalo is a bit violent at the end. But do you know, like the giant? A story about everyone's terrified of the giant, but the giant just sits in his cave all peaceful and just wants everyone to like him and be friends, but everyone's been told to be terrified of the giant. And you just woke up one morning and looked at the giant and thought, that giant's actually quite nice. Why am I frightened of that giant? Is the BFG like that? I can't remember. Oddly, Arthur, seeing as you've confided in me, I shall confide in you. I wrote a children's book when I was about 8 called Geoffrey the Giant, and that was the plot of Geoffrey the Giant. So I've got a horrible feeling that the story I was reaching for in the back was my own juvenilia.
What a way to self-promote 40 years later.
Wait until I start trying to flog that book on the radio like I spent most of last year flogging the last one. Arthur, thank you. And again, this conversation is about things that were very easy to believe. The EU is a protectionist racket. It's an undemocratic body. It prevents us from doing things. These are powerful, powerful pronouncements. And there is nothing even surprising, let alone embarrassing, about having your head turned by them. But now we've had 2 3/4 years to see whether or not they were true. And I guess you could still argue that the EU was protectionist in that it will move heaven and earth to protect the interests of its members and the integrity of its markets and freedoms. In this case, 4 freedoms. Indivisible and inseparable. So you don't get freedom of movement of capital or freedom of movement of services without freedom of movement of labour, which of course means freedom of movement of people. And this kind of thing is why Arthur, who was too young to vote but would have voted leave, and everyone else we've spoken to so far today, they're the ones that deserve a second vote. If you're still convinced that you want to leave, you get one too. So what's not to like? And have a look at the politics.co.uk website for Ian Dunt's latest thoughts on this issue, one of the most astute observers and chroniclers of the current mess. Someone else actually who's moved from one side of the debate to the other in the last few years. But the headline says it all. Tonight we find out if MPs are prepared to lead us out of this mess. I have to say, even I did a double take when I saw the guest list at Chequers this weekend. The idea that Theresa May remains in thrall. The weird thing is, when she came in, she seemed to hate everything that those men represent. The lazy, entitled Etonian that is perhaps best symbolised by a Boris Johnson or a Jacob Rees-Mogg. 2 very different creatures, but cut from oddly similar cloth. This isn't a lazy generalisation about Eton or about public school. It would be a bit idiotic of me to try and lump all public school boys into the same category. But similarly, I know quite a few Etonians, because I'm a member of the metropolitan liberal elite. Obviously not the anti-metropolitan liberal elite Etonians like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, but I know a few, and they are by no means represented by the likes of Johnson and Rees-Mogg, or for that matter, David Cameron. But the point is that you look at that list at Chequers this weekend and you think, well, I thought Theresa May hated that lot. I thought she'd spent her whole time as Home Secretary gnashing her teeth, grinding her jaw, because of the sort of lazy entitlement of David Cameron and his cronies. But now she's giving the keys to the palace, potentially, to the Johnson-Rees-Mogg faction. So that was odd. But the most odd thing and the most frightening thing, and the reason why even I did a double take, was because it would appear that, you know, she is seat in all but name, you know. She's essentially in office but not in power, as they say. The question is who's going to get their hands on the steering wheel, and she essentially invited some of the people shown to have had the most profound misunderstandings or to have perpetrated the most profound misrepresentations of the European Union, all piling into the passenger seat beside her. That's the bit I don't get, you know? The bit where the men who have discredited themselves with their own words, in the case of the former Secretary of State for Brexit, Dominic Raab, now well over 3 million people have watched my little roundup of him saying things that have turned out not to be true. Whether it was ignorance or something more sinister that led him to say that we definitely have to have checks at the Irish border before the actual votes were cast, or whether it was ignorance or something more sinister that saw him not appreciate the importance of Dover to Calais while pontificating upon what trade would be like. I will never know whether it is simple ignorance stroke incompetence or something more sinister. But all these men at Chequers have got something in their recent past that suggests they either didn't understand or didn't tell the truth about Brexit. Why is Theresa May still relying upon them, still curtsying to them? That's the bit I don't get, except of course I do. It's because the survival of the Conservative Party is now considerably more important to her than the welfare of the country. Whether or not the status is quite the wrong word. I think we're going to have to go for that dread word legacy. Whether or not her own perception of her own legacy turns out to be more important than the future of the Conservative Party and therefore unwittingly serves the welfare of the whole country, I think that's what we'll find out this week, possibly even tonight. Bryn is in Worcester Park. Bryn, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello, Bryn.
First of all, it's my second call to you, but I'm a little bit nervy talking about this subject.
I'm like a pussycat today, Bryn. You've got absolutely nothing to worry about, mate.
I believe that, actually. But many people are going to scream when I say this, but
I'm not.
I genuinely believe that I represent the majority of people in this country that voted,
yes,
whether they voted Remain or Leave, in saying that I wasn't qualified to vote because of my knowledge of this. Before I kick off, can I just say, and this may sound really, really insignificant, but, you know, over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I cannot remember a conversation with any friends or anybody to do with Europe. The only conversations I ever had was where they were going on holiday.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, things have blown up like this, but nobody ever talked about
It's worse
Europe.
than that, Bryn. It's worse than that, because I can't remember ever seeing a panel programme on the television, and one thinks most obviously of Question Time, where you had a passionate, isn't quite the right word, but just a really enthusiastic advocate of European Union membership contributing to the debate. They would queue up. You gave a season ticket to some of the people that never had a nice word to say about it. But I never heard from anybody who could actually tell me what it was doing and why it was important and where perhaps some of the myths had grown up and the things that we should be trying to improve and the things that we should be grateful for. It's as if it just appeared fully formed as a toxic debate in the middle of public life in about 2015.
Exactly my point, James. As I say, the only thing I can recall is people talking about where they were going on holiday. But can I just say, you know, I do watch and follow many political programmes, and it's mainly to try and suss out the politicians more than anything else. And I'm not intelligent about this.
Oh, you are.
I really did not know which way to go. And this is going to sound dreadful saying this, but I really disliked David Cameron.
Yeah.
And if he said in, I thought out, because I just didn't trust him. That didn't lead my decision in the end, I must say. But
they probably played a part.
But, you know, everybody else... Well, I voted Remain in the end.
Okay.
And,
so what are you doing on my show? I only want repentant leavers on the programme today. But no, I'm joking, because you make the point you could easily have gone either way, which is normal.
Yeah, but I genuinely believe. Last night on LBC, I heard one caller, which was very, very rare, saying that he didn't vote because he just didn't feel qualified. Yeah. He did not know. Everybody, that 99.9% of people that phone in or you speak to say, I know what I voted for. None that I have asked knew any consequences. You just throw one question to them, the easiest one.
Oi.
So what we all
don't give away all my... you're giving away all my tricks, Bryn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's my act that you're publicly unpicking.
So you ask people one question. What was the thought that you gave to Northern Ireland border? They didn't. I've not met one. Now, there will be people like yourself, James, and people that work in broadcast and political circles that would have done. But if this was a clear-cut thing, why didn't 100% of the professionals, the politicians, all vote one way? Why didn't they all vote Remain or all vote Leave?
Because if it was something you could measure and do in terms of statistics, then it should have been close to unanimous. You should have all been able to agree on what the result of the sum was. I think if I've understood... No, but if I've understood your question correctly, the answer simply is that it was feelings as well. And I wish I could come up with a better word, Bryn, than feelings, because feeling sounds... like a pejorative. It's, you voted for your feelings. But we win wars because of feelings. Feelings are incredibly important. Feelings are what motivates one man to jump into the pond to pull out a drowning child and another man to stand there looking at his shoes. Feelings are incredibly important. And I think to be as generous as I humanly can, not necessarily to the leaders, but certainly to the followers, is that these feelings were really, really powerful. So even politicians who felt, and the one I know best is Sir Bill Bill Cash, who's been campaigning to leave the European Union for 30 or 40 years, and I hope he wouldn't mind me saying a large part of his motivation is feelings, and you could call it patriotism, you could call it whatever you want to call it, but it's a feeling, and that explains why the politicians went one way and the other way. It's more about feelings than facts.
But the public, the people like me, and I do believe that I represent the majority, were not qualified.
Well, nor was I, mate. You're not going to get
any
any prizes for that. I wasn't qualified to vote in the European Union.
Well, there you go, James, and you know...
Do you think you are now?
Not really, but I can say one thing.
Go on.
Is that I'm definitely confirmed that I'm glad I voted Remain.
Of course.
And I would continue to vote Remain now.
Yes.
Even more so.
Yeah, well, I think I'm a lot better qualified than I was, but I'm not going to sit here and say that it's beyond the realms of possibility that somebody could ring in and say, are you aware of ... and prove that it's true. I don't mean, stuff like armies and Turkey. I mean, stuff that is demonstrably true and imminent or already on the statute book or already extant, and I would go, crikey, no, actually, I didn't. I genuinely didn't. 11:28 is the time. Bryn, thank you. Call number 2. We don't have to keep a tally, but I'm looking forward to call number 3. I'll come to Chris, who's in Portsmouth, first after the break. And as I bid farewell to Bryn, it frees up a potential phone line for you. The question remains, at this point, or we may move on, the question remains an admission of maybe not guilt, but certainly perhaps error, tactical error. Feelings have run so high. It was that tweet from Sarah Vine. And as I was preparing to respond to it, when she said that Leavers couldn't have come to the march on Saturday because they would have been murdered, lynched was the word that she used. And I suddenly found my bile rising, I found my feelings flaring up. And I'd had one of the best days of my life, in part, on Saturday. And I thought, I don't know whether they do it on purpose. Is she doing it on purpose? Is she doing that so that she gets a load of violent responses, a load of abusive responses, and then she can sit back and go QED? Because what you've really done is look at a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people, possibly 1 million, possibly less, possibly more. It's not really the point, but hundreds of thousands of people who are harmonious, peaceful. You could disagree with them, but they were lovely. I was there, in the middle of it. They were lovely. It was an amazing moment. And she sits at home in a house that is full of stuff bought on expenses, coffee tables and fancy lamps and all that sort of thing. And she tweets that if she'd gone along, she would have been murdered or lynched. And I just sat there and thought, my God, the whole time that they've been ramping up the violence and the division while accusing the other lot of doing it. Now is the time to call halt. I bear you no ill will if you voted because you believed what you were told about the German car industry, or about French winemakers, or about Norway or Switzerland. I don't think we're ever going to be bosom buddies if you're the kind of person that falls for the breaking point poster propaganda. But the rest of you deserve another vote more than I do. And it's a little odd, perhaps, to reflect upon how we've all fallen into the trap of irreparable division, haven't we? All of us. Well, maybe you haven't. I'm being a little unkind, but I clearly have. And I've fallen into it while patting myself on the back for being one of the few people telling the truth about the whole sorry mess. But if I'm... And also responding too much to the liars. So how many times have I said to you, it is absolutely absurd for anybody to suggest that everyone who voted Leave is thick or racist or both, right? How many times? 1 million? So why do I still bother even giving lip service to a text or a tweet that will come in saying, oh, you keep saying that everyone who voted to Leave is racist or thick or both? I literally the polar opposite of reality. But then you worry that if you're ignoring that stuff, you are amplifying it or magnifying it. It will grow in a vacuum, oddly. I think I've changed my view on that now. I know what I feel. Everybody honest listening to me knows what I feel. I know that lots of profoundly decent people whose worldview is pretty much identical to mine, voted to leave the European Union, and I know that they did so because they believed a succession of perfectly plausible propositions that have now turned out not to be true. I think Farage, as ever, is part of the problem, is that because he was such a prominent part of the Leave campaign, you kind of presume that everybody who voted Leave is comfortable with that kind of contribution to public life. And yet, the first message I got from a Leave voter who'd voted by post came shortly after Joe Cox was murdered, on the day that disgusting Breaking Point poster was unveiled. And he said, "I'm sorry, mate, you were right. I didn't realise what they were going to do with that kind of validation." I said, look, trust me, I'm exposed to more of this than anyone is. And people who are Islamophobic, people who are racist, people who are bigoted, people who are vile, people who've got their political roots in the National Front, they are going to see a Leave vote as a victory. I was right. They did. But that is not the beginning and the end of the story. Loads and loads of people who saw a Leave vote as a victory feel the same way as you and I do. We have identical attitudes to immigration, to our neighbours, to our colleagues and classmates who come from overseas, in this case the 27 EU countries. So, oddly, I wonder whether the truly silent majority on the Leave side are the people that voted in good faith, with clean conscience, and have spent almost 3 years being lumped in with some of the nastiest individuals ever to draw breath in public life in Britain. That must have been awful. I don't think I owe you an apology, because I've been at great pains to draw distinctions between the racists and the bigots and everybody else who voted Leave. But if I'd voted Leave and I'd spent the last 3 years essentially being viewed by a lot of Remainers as being in bed with that Breaking Point poster, it's another constituency that deserve a second vote more than almost anybody else imaginable. It's 11:38. Chris is in Portsmouth. Chris, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Chris.
Yeah, I'm, I guess, what I'd call a converted Leaver. It's been slow coming. Well, yes. I think on the day after the referendum, I suddenly thought, what the bloody hell have we done? But then you go to the denial thing, and I thought, you look at the reasons why I voted, and then the main reason was probably for me the direction of Europe and the Selmayr move to a federalist superstate, which of course is unlikely to happen.
Is it not explicitly ruled out in one of the most recent treaties as well, or not? I could have got that wrrong. But anyway, if you want to stop it happening, the worst thing you can do is run away.
Well, and also, I think you realise that those who voted for UKIP and put Euro MPs in there who don't turn up for the vote will by default allow that sort of thing to happen anyway. But the reality is, I've come around that I thought I was fairly informed at that time. Okay, more so than a lot of people I know. But I didn't know the half of it. I mean, the things like, I thought the Spanish were nicking our fish, the Dutch were nicking our fish, but then you realise, actually, it's our government that sold them the rights to nick our fish, so they weren't actually nicking it.
And the quotas were introduced largely as a result of British overfishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other thing is, as you've been pointing out, it was purely logical that with BMW and Mercedes' third biggest market, VW's third biggest market, and the powers of these companies and the French wine producers and the tomato growers and all these industries in our 27 other countries would ensure that we would logically get a good deal. And I mean, it's been quite impressive how the Eurozone has kept, or sorry, the other 27 countries have kept this cohesive message, and their industries have fallen behind it. And clearly, that isn't going to happen. We're not going to get a good deal.
Do you understand why? That sounds a bit condescending. But let me say, I would struggle to articulate it completely. I can use the phrase, the integrity of the single market, the indivisibility of the four freedoms, but to understand why the German car industry was not only never going to seek to change the terms of the market, but never could have done. That is something I think we're still a bit behind the curve on in the United Kingdom. Well,
of course, because they are just one small voice in a sea of other voices within the other 27 countries, right? So they, whilst they are powerful, they're not powerful enough on their on their own. So,
but also, I wonder whether they would rather take the hit of us leaving and keep the single market like it is because of things like freedom of movement of parts, just-in-time supply chain, freedom of movement of labour, all the advantages of membership that actually on the scales of a German car manufacturer, us leaving is bad. That is a big chunk that goes on the bad side of the scales. But us being allowed to rewrite the rules of membership in the minds of these individuals in these industries clearly would have been a much, much bigger chunk than us leaving. So it's the lesser of two evils which we've forced them to choose between.
Yeah, no, ultimately, I think, we're not going to stop buying German cars, right? And
probably not, but we're going to pay more for them if we crash out without a deal, and therefore we will probably be buying fewer of them.
Yes, well, in the short term, yes, but ultimately that was another reason. I just thought we're going to get a good deal because and I believe that. I never for a minute believed the 350 million on the red bus. That was, I don't think
that's turning into my holy grail because Dominic Cummings, who sat at the helm of this whole project, is utterly confident that was the biggest factor in the whole thing, and yet it's becoming like the opposite of Woodstock. I'm struggling to find anyone who actually believed what was on the side of that bus. So the bloke who wrote it says it was the most important thing in the whole campaign, and the blokes who voted for his campaign absolutely adamant that no one believed it at all.
I think I have come across.
I believe you. Oh, you have. All right. Well, maybe they open up more to you than they would to me.
Well, I don't think they admit it now, right? So, okay. But of course we know it didn't factor in the our rebate and the funding we get for various projects across the UK. So, even if the number was correct in the first place, which it wasn't, it's
and the other thing of that, which I kind of didn't fully understand, of course, is when somebody quite understandably turns around and says, well, it's not their money, it's our money, they're just giving it back. But the point is that the EU, particularly with development and investment in poor areas, the EU decides where that shared money, that pooled money goes according to need. So you're not going to be able to offer up a new steelworks or a new hospital or a massive new leisure centre to an MP in a marginal constituency for party political reasons in the way that a chancellor can do. The European Union makes its decisions based objectively according to need. I'm sure it's imperfect, but that's why the argument about it being our money that they're giving back doesn't even work either.
No, absolutely. But I think it also ties into foreign aid, and I get annoyed when people say, "Oh, we should cut foreign aid." And I think we should we should look at how it's spent. But the reality is, if you improve the lives of people in the third world, they're not going to become economic migrants, which of course annoys those
or even
people,
refugees,
right?
because a sounder economy in countries that are vulnerable to war and coup d'état, the more stable and secure those countries become, the less vulnerable they are to war and coup d'état, which means the less likely it will be that there'll be an exodus of people looking for sanctuary and safety. And yet, again, as you know, as you've just alluded to during that campaign, the people who said we shouldn't be spending money on foreign aid were the same people that said we should vote to leave the European Union because the refugee crisis might somehow end up engulfing us.
Yeah, no, totally. But I think I might just say I think the final reason. I mean, you have people like Dyson telling you that this is going to be great, and then I think that was probably probably the straw that broke the camel's back. And watching the Channel 4 dispatches, and I've got a couple of friends who are listening at the moment, Andy and Sam, who have kindly tried to convert me and groom me to remain, and probably succeeded in doing so over the time.
All right, lads. Nice to see you. There you go. We'll be the three musketeers. We'll take on this Brexiteer between us. I'll be Porthos.
A lot of my other mates are.
Of course. But hasn't it been nice today to have the conversation in a way that recognises what actually we have in common rather than what sets us apart? And although your needle may have moved, we could have had this conversation even if it hadn't, couldn't we?
No, absolutely. But I mean, the net of it is, yes, we need a second referendum.
Of course we do. Of course we do. But logic... Yeah, exactly. And the reason why I'm not sure we will, the reason why it's not a given, the reason why I think that thing you just heard in the bulletin about the European Commission warning that no deal is becoming more likely, the last two paragraphs of Boris Johnson's article in the Daily Telegraph today, an article in a newspaper owned by the men who own the Ritz. OK? Anti-establishment, anti-elite. Bastion, the Ritz. And Boris Johnson writes in a way that demonstrates he either fails to understand or continues to deliberately deceive. I can't read his mind. I don't know what it is. But I'll read you these two paragraphs after the break, and you will know that he is either still ignorant of the simplest facts, or still trying to sell people things that are not true. Now, given his association with Steve Bannon recently, I think you could be forgiven for sticking the house on the second option. Where every caller, except old Bryn in Worcester Park, but he could easily have gone either way back in June 2016, feels they deserve another vote on the question of leaving the European Union, because the vote was to go through a door into a room that had been described at great length and in great detail by the people encouraging us to go through the door. Now, it's a little late to point out that some of the rooms that were described by some of the key campaigners could not simultaneously exist in a logical universe. You could not have, for example, the Norway or the Switzerland that were cited by everybody from Nigel Farage down, or up, actually, to be fair. You could not have that if you were also going to enact the abolition of freedom of movement that people like him insisted was necessary if we were to, quote, control our borders. So even in the minds of one individual campaigner, you had two promises that could not be simultaneously kept. But that doesn't matter, because what they're trying to claim now is that we voted to walk through the door without having a Scooby-Doo about what was on the other side. And that's so far from the truth that it almost is the strongest case yet for another referendum. Will we get one? I don't know. I don't think anybody can make valid predictions at the moment, because the depth of Theresa May's incompetence and or moral corruption is unfathomable. And listen to this from Boris Johnson, who was at Chequers at the weekend. The last two paragraphs of his article in the House Journal of the Ritz Hotel, the Daily Telegraph. If she cannot give that evidence of change, she should drop the deal. Right. In the context of these two paragraphs, that word deal refers to the withdrawal agreement. So if we drop the deal, as is suggested in paragraph 1, there is no withdrawal agreement. If there is no withdrawal agreement, there is no agreement about what happens next, okay? You still with me at the back? She should drop the deal, go back to Brussels, and set out the terms that so many on both sides, Remainers and Leavers, now believe are sensible. Well, I have the privilege of speaking every day to Remainers and Leavers. I don't know where Johnson's getting his information from, because from where I'm sitting, that's absolute hogwash. His own sister and brother are prominent Remainers. Though I haven't heard them saying that they believe that what he's suggesting now is sensible. This is what he says: Remainers and Leavers now believe are sensible. Extend the implementation period to the end of 2021 if necessary. Right, stop there. Do you see the problem with that? Drop the deal and then extend the implementation period. That implementation period is for the implementation of the deal. He is simultaneously, in the space of two paragraphs, saying we should drop the deal and then extend the deal to the end of 2021. Use it to negotiate a free trade deal. Use what to negotiate a free trade deal? The extra time that you've secured while leaving the withdrawal agreement. Pay the fee. It's not a fee. It's meet our responsibilities in the same way that Boris Johnson has to pay money to his ex-wives and his families after leaving them, so we would have to meet our responsibilities to the European Union after leaving it, but come out of the EU now without the backstop. So we're going to be able to negotiate a free trade deal and control our borders while we've essentially rendered a border in Ireland inevitable, and we've pulled out of the withdrawal agreement that would temporarily protect us from that inevitability. This is a wigwam of absolute nonsense. It is time for the PM to channel the spirit of Moses in Exodus and say to Pharaoh in Brussels, "Let my people go." This man is still within sniffing distance of number 10 Downing Street. The only mystery now is whether or not he is being ignorant or whether or not he is being deliberately deceitful. And I think in the case of Boris Johnson, history suggests that we should lean towards deliberately deceitful, with a side order of ignorance. But in 2 paragraphs, he writes, she should drop the deal. We should extend the implementation period, which is the deal. And still they cheer. Still Theresa May rolls out the red carpet for him at Chequers. Still the newspapers queue up to treat him as some sort of political force, visionary, future Prime Minister. And still the doffers of caps and the tuggers of forelocks will go along with it. And again, if we were going to have a penny drop moment, it would be the point at which a former foreign minister with pretensions to being Prime Minister writes a column in the Daily Telegraph that in its final 2 paragraphs utterly and completely contradicts itself. But hey-ho. Victoria is in Stansted. Victoria, what would you like to say?
Boris Johnson would be the most inappropriate leader we could possibly appoint.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether you've been paying attention or not, Victoria, but that probably makes it more likely rather than less.
I think you're being very diplomatic towards people who didn't give enough thought to their Leave vote.
I think they gave a lot of thought to it, and if they did think, then being told that...
A lot of Leavers did.
Yes.
A lot of Leavers didn't. It was
a lot of Remainers didn't, Victoria, to be honest. I'm not sure I gave it as much thought as I should have done. I just sort of voted against some of the people lining up on the other side of the argument.
When I heard there was going to be a referendum, I was stood in Stansted Airport, and as I looked around, I thought this is uniquely complex, and we do not have the calibre of government to negotiate this, and it's going to take triple the length of time anybody thinks it will. And my immediate suspicion was that those who would vote Leave would be those who were most likely to be adversely affected by it. And this time last Monday, I thought, do you know what, I'm so exasperated, give them no deal and let's just see how it turns out for them. I've calmed down since then, and over the weekend I'm minded to think that the most democratic thing we could do now is have a second referendum, because it doesn't undermine the democracy of the first.
Well, it clearly doesn't, because you name a campaigner, I'll find you something they said that has turned out not to be true. So you talk about the will of the people. It's the will of people who believed promises that have been broken. So what will is that?
A second referendum could allow Leavers who still feel as simplistically and as tribally and as whatever the grammar is for, with sovereignty, to vote to do it again. But if everybody in the bus says turn left and the bus does then turn left, if you get to another junction, then you will need to make a decision again. You don't just drive over the roundabout and crash the minibus. And I don't think we're left with any other option. I've given it a lot of thought, and I don't think there's any other option now. I think it's undemocratic.
And you clearly voted Remain, so you're only the second Remain voter on the programme today. But if I tally what you've said with what one of the previous callers said, who I think was a Leave voter, I don't think it was a Bryn in Worcester Park. But the knowledge that... Because and Susanna Reid, my friend over at GMB, Good Morning Britain, makes this point most powerfully. She was the one that gave me my biggest wobble on this one, is that we have to go ahead with it, because only then will they see, or will we see, what the reality of Brexit is. I think that changed for me with two things: the no deal becoming the most likely mode of Brexit, perhaps, but also the knowledge has become irresistible that even if we leave with no deal and it all goes horribly, horribly wrong, the people in the box seats will never say, sorry, we were wrong. They will continue to scapegoat and blame and whine and wheedle and moan and whinge and heckle for the rest of their lives, because it's all they've ever done and it's all that they know. So Nicholas Soames has just tweeted very powerfully about where his responsibility lies. I hope our parliamentarians know. We have a bit of a Damascene moment. I felt something quite important shift inside me on Saturday as I attended the so-called People's Vote March. And indeed, as I had the enormous privilege and slightly daunting pleasure of being the first speaker on the platform in Parliament Square. But I said something that I shared with you last week when I was trying to work out what I was going to say. And the little phrase we came up with was contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. Very, very quickly, if I was one of the con men, I'd be trying to cast that as being patronising or casting it as being condescending or sneering. It's none of those things. It's a simple statement of my feelings. It was rather gratifying to see it on a few placards that were knocking about the place on Saturday. T-shirts are to follow, actually, with donations to a charity yet to be decided. But contempt for the con, compassion for the conned. Pithy slogan, but we know where pithy slogans have got us. So then you dig deeper into what it means. And what it actually means is more of an intellectual compassion than an emotional compassion. And an intellectual compassion involves empathy. And empathy involves imagining the circumstances in which you would have voted to leave the European Union, and I found it surprisingly easy. There is something almost irresistible about the logic, in the absence of other information and other factors, the idea that BMW or Mercedes-Benz or Audi would in no way allow anything to make it harder for them to sell or indeed manufacture cars in this country. It's quite a logical thing, that. Maybe we even should give Digby Pudding Jones a break when he said, I know I'm right, even though he was wrong. I think the fact that he said, I know I'm right, is what sadly excludes him from any form of kind of forgiveness. I know I'm right. You can't know you're right. And you were wrong. You're pudding. So people who insisted they were right accepted. Everyone who just thought it made sense and seemed plausible, fair play to you. Turns out it was wrong. Turns out it's a massively more complicated issue than we realised. And the German automotive industry, let alone the German government, sees a lot more value in retaining the single market than it does in allowing a departing member to rewrite the rules. Put it like that, it's not even that hard to swallow, is it? Of course you're going to retain that. It's the single market that lets you do just-in-time delivery, that lets you do this, that lets you do that. And what sustains it and keeps it afloat is the cooperation and the investment from the member states. So if you're not going to cooperate and invest anymore, you don't get to benefit from the things that cooperation and investment has created. Simples. I never heard it explained like that in the run-up, so I could easily have voted the other way. Of course, if you did vote the other way, and now you've seen that that particular part of the platform was wrong, bogus, false, mistaken, you more than anyone deserve another crack of the whip. And if you no longer care about the fact that the German car industry isn't going to come to our rescue, you can still vote to leave for whatever reasons you now have. But the ones you had then, they were wrong. 12:07. Philip is in Hatfield. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yes, thanks for letting me join in.
You're very welcome.
I really need your help. I voted to leave. The reason I voted to leave mainly was bureaucracy. You know, I'm paying money to my parish council for stuff, and
yes,
county council, and the rest goes to the government. Now I'm paying somebody else for stuff. But in the last 6 months or so, I've really sort of come round to, you know, big mistakes. You know, the way this has been badly negotiated, we're going to get a poor deal. We might just as well remain in. But what has really confused me, James, this is where I need your help. I have a good friend who's got a son who's quite a senior academic in Cambridge.
Right.
I was with them at the weekend, and they were stating that we would lose things like our abstention veto in 2020, and that's contained in the Lisbon Treaty. Would you know that's true?
Well, I mean, I haven't got everything in front of me. It contains an echo of something that's been doing the rounds on social media and has been shown to be complete hokum, but that's why I find it odd to imagine that a Cambridge academic would be inflating it in company.
Well, I mean, he's a classical academic. He's hardly political or anything like that. But
why mention it then? Sorry.
Well, it's going around Cambridge. That apparently a lot of people feel the same way.
It's going around Facebook. I've seen it on Facebook, this notion that we would... There will be some areas where I think that the veto might lose. There might be some areas, as there are already, where the veto would not be as simple to apply. But if we were in the European Union, we'd be able to resist any changes to the current state of affairs, wouldn't we?
But not if we lose our veto in 2020.
No. But they couldn't remove the veto without it being democratically endorsed by members.
well, what they say, I think, is they say that if the majority decide.
Right, and this is just your mate at Cambridge again, is it? It was quite an interesting conversation you had at the weekend, Philip.
It's obviously something doing the rounds, James.
Well, of course it's doing the rounds, in the same way that Turkey did the rounds before the European Union referendum. Everyone was told that Turkey was imminently joining. Everybody was told that the German car industry wouldn't countenance any changes to our trading arrangements. Everyone was told that we couldn't control our borders. Everyone was told that we had millions of laws foisted upon us, and then they couldn't tell me what those laws were. So I don't have in front of me everything you need to answer the questions that you're asking, but can I give you some advice in one simple word?
Of course you can.
Google.
Well, I have done, and that's
good. Well, go to a decent fact-check site, and you'll be able to find everything that you need to find. Philip. Jack's in Tooting. Jack, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
No. Who said that?
Jack from Tooting.
Is that Jack from Tooting?
It is, yeah.
What would you like to say, Jack?
Right. Thank you for taking my call, James. Could you just please give me 30 to 40 seconds just to make some points which I don't believe have been made yet? You know, we've got an ageing population, obviously, so we're always going to need immigration, whether it be from the EU, Africa, China or India. And the government has not been honest with the public about this. We should thank the immigrants for coming here. Since the Second World War, we've welcomed and needed immigration, and they've helped to make this country the fifth or sixth richest country in the world, which is slowly fading away now. So this government and previous governments have failed to build enough infrastructure for the increased immigration which has come here. They failed to build enough houses, enough hospitals, enough schools, etc., etc. That's why we felt overburdened with the amount of people that have come here. But if you invite people to come to your place, then obviously you need to build more infrastructure. We've taken the money. We've taken the money that these people have bring to this country, but we've not reinvested it. This government and previous governments should apologise to the public and should thank the immigrants for all what they have done.
I think an awful lot of people who voted Leave would agree with you, and I think part of the problem that we've all been complicit in is creating this idea that everyone who voted to Leave would somehow disagree with what you've said. Everyone I know who voted to Leave, Jack, is supremely comfortable, not just comfortable, but appreciative of what you've described, the simple facts of immigration, particularly European Union immigration, being a net benefit to our economy. And of course, then you look at the NHS and other public services, and many people would argue they would struggle to survive without the EU workforce that are currently on the books.
But yet, many people voted to leave because they felt there were too many immigrants here already.
I know that, and you know that. And they know that, and when you ask them where these immigrants are, they say, not the ones I actually know, not the ones I work with, not the ones that my children go to school with, it's the ones that I read about in The Sun, it's the mythical ones that I read about in the comments section of the Mail Online. And here's the challenge, Jack, because even by the time of the 2015 general election, even the Labour Party was sticking slogans on mugs that appeared to play to the myth that you've described. As a politician, how do you sell the upticks, the positives, the benefits of immigration? How do you sell them when the bloke on the other side is whispering in the ear, they're trying to steal your jobs, they're trying to steal your women, they're trying to steal your money, they're trying to steal your biscuits? All you've got in his other ear is, well, they haven't. And the other bloke just says, yeah, not yet, but they want to. That's the challenge, Jack. That's the challenge throughout humanity, isn't it? Between the person whispering false poison into one ear and the person whispering dull truths into the other.
You can see it on a daily basis.
You surely can.
As you get older, you need hospitals more. So, I mean, I've been in hospital a number of times. Most of the nurses there are not British.
I know.
You know, they're from the EU, and they are diligent. They're conscientious. They're conscientious.
And so are the ones that aren't. And in fact, you've reminded me, Jack, of something I intended to do on the programme this morning. I've already done it on Twitter. I'd like to thank Dr. William Toohey and all the staff on the Starlight ward at the West Middlesex Hospital in West London. They have earned the undying, the eternal gratitude of my family for events of the last week or so. But that's just a simple fact that you describe. The workforce, the staff, are as multicoloured and as multicultural and as diverse and as different as the rest of the country, the rest of society. But I still don't know how do you make that point? Because you tell me about the nurses, Jack, and if I was someone, taking the knee to that despicable Breaking Point poster, I'd just say something like, all right, well, the nurses can stay, but we've got to get rid of the rest of them. Do you see what I mean?
What about construction then? What about construction?
Well, I could stick my head out the window now and find someone in the construction industry who claims that the reason why he hasn't had a pay rise or he can't find work has nothing to do with the fact that he's lazy or not prepared to move, and it's everything to do with the fact that people who are prepared to cross continents in search of work have somehow undercut him.
Just what about healthcare? What about healthcare? How soon is it you're going to need a carer?
Yeah, they can stay. I don't mean them. They can stay. It's the others I need to get rid of. That's how it works, Jack. Between us, you and me might be able to come up with an answer, but it'll be hard. Something that's not hard is dealing with Philip in Hatfield, who was on a moment ago asking about something that someone in Cambridge had asked him and told him about, and I suggested Google. So I thought I'll do Google. It's a bit patronising just to say Google. I Googled lose our veto in 2020. The first thing that comes up from Full Fact, an independent charity that checks stuff, is there's a lot wrong with this viral list about the Lisbon Treaty, and then it goes through in detail about everything that's wrong with it. So, Philip, mate, pain me though it does to have one fly in the ointment of this incredibly harmonious and friendly programme, you, pal, were not a good faith actor. Because if you can't Google it, but you can ring a national radio station to ask about it, I'd suggest that you might need to give your head a wobble. So here's the thing, where does it begin? It's GATT 24 is the most... Article 24 of GATT will allow us to do whatever we want for 10 years and get unicorns by tea time. And then you hear it, particularly on phone-in radio programmes, you hear people ring in and say it, and sometimes the presenter doesn't know whether it's true or not, so it gets out there. Then you see it on Facebook. So I'm very keen to triple-check what Philip in Hatfield suggested or asked us to look into for him, possibly in good faith. Maybe I'm doing him a disservice when I say you should Google this stuff before you ring me. But if you simply Google, do we lose our veto in 2020, this comes up about claims regarding the Lisbon Treaty that are doing the rounds on social media or, if you prefer, doing the rounds in Cambridge. And it appears under the headline, which is the first thing on your search terms. There's a lot wrong with this viral list about the Lisbon Treaty, and the very first thing in the list of things that's wrong addresses directly the claim Philip made about losing our veto. It's quite incredible. I mean, genuinely incredible in many ways. So here you go. The UK, all along with all existing members of the EU, lose their abstention veto in 2020 as laid down in the Lisbon Treaty when the system changes to that of majority acceptance with no abstentions or vetoes being allowed. That's the claim. This is wrong. The Lisbon Treaty did make changes to how EU law gets passed, which reduced the scope of states' veto ability, but it did not abolish veto powers. And these changes are already in effect, rather than coming into force in 2020. The term abstention veto is not even a part of European Union law, as you can see by the fact that most Google results for the term are references to this thing that's gone viral in the first place. EU legislation has to be approved by the Council of the European Union, which is made up of ministerial representatives of the governments of all EU member states. So maybe we should give Philip a break. Maybe he was being genuine. And because this person that said it to him is at Cambridge University, albeit doing classics, he thought there must be something in it. But check. Just check. It's simply not true. This is, in case it's appeared in your inbox, this is what appears at the top of the bogus claims. Why is nobody talking about the Lisbon Treaty, the treaty that comes into force 2020? It's worse than the so-called deal. If 99% of the British think the deal is bad, just look at the Lisbon Treaty. People need to know, Leavers and Remainers. What will actually happen if we stay in the EU is a question no Remainer will ever answer, but here it is, warts and all. And it's all wrong. It is wrong to say that the Lisbon Treaty comes into force in 2020. Do you know why it's wrong to say that the Lisbon Treaty comes into force in 2020? Shall I tell you why it's wrong to say that the Lisbon Treaty comes into force in 2020? Because it came into force in 2009. 10 years ago. As was agreed by EU member countries, every single one of them, including us, in 2007. It has been in place since 2009. If the UK were to remain in the European Union beyond March of 2019 for any reason, then the Lisbon Treaty wouldn't suddenly change anything. But it's still out there. Even Cambridge academicals are falling for it. That's how it works. So you, and I'm not going to single anyone else out for particular criticism, but you will be listening to LBC at some point in the next 48 hours, and a caller will come on, and a caller will claim that this absolute hogwash that has been disseminated and amplified on Facebook is true, just as I've heard callers on other programmes talking about Article 24 of GATT. And this is not a normal way to earn a living. Most people don't spend their days with the noses in the treaties. Most people doing what I do for a living haven't read the Good Friday Group. Why would you? Answer, because we owe it to our callers. But you will hear a caller on this radio station making reference to this stuff, and a presenter may not know that it's not true, which is how it happens. That's why they do it. That's why they promote it. It's why they tweet it. It's why they post it. Because you just get it out there. And you know what they say about a lie? It's halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. Well, today, thank you, Philip, because it's because of you that I remembered to put my trousers on this morning. 23 minutes after 12 is the time. 2 phone lines free if you want to grab one and just talk to me about the easy reasons for voting Leave, the stuff that was all too easy to believe would be true, not the scary stuff. We focused almost exclusively on the lies about Turkey, the lies about immigration, the disgusting, manipulative nature of that despicable Breaking Point poster. What about all the perfectly good reasons, which were considered by perfectly good people as reasons to vote to leave? Now they've turned out not to be true. When the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? Andy's in Stamford. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. I'm surprised you're still awake, mate, after that little diatribe, quite frankly. But we carry on.
It's absolutely fine. It's interesting you're saying about unicorns and fact-checking, because I'm guilty of buying a unicorn and not checking.
You're not, mate. Forgive me for splitting hairs. I'm doing a quick fact check already. You're not guilty of buying a unicorn. You might have bought a promise of a unicorn, but you certainly didn't buy a unicorn.
I'm certainly hoping that we get the chance to do something about this.
Really?
I like a lot of people. I cast my vote in 2016. I was an ardent Brexiteer, and I cast it in good faith that bringing what I believe to be the chance to make our own laws back in this country again, and I believe we'd be able to form our own trade deals, and it would somehow make our country better. And I believed the politicians, and I used to watch a lot of debates with late night debates with Giselle Stewart, Andrea Leadsom on the Leave campaign. It really spoke to me, and I thought, wow, we could actually prosper should we leave the European Union and set our own path. But it's took me 2.5 years since the vote, but it has took me a long time to realise that I bought a dud. I want my money back, James.
When did the needle start to move? Can you remember, or has it just been incremental? I'm one of these people. I go on social media. I follow Remainers and Leavers, and I sort of tried to argue the Brexit case, and people would be saying their side of the story, and I'd be saying my side. And it got to the point where I was reading these conversations I was having with other people, and I'm agreeing with everything they're saying, and looking at what I've written and thinking, I don't back that anymore. It's rubbish. What I was writing was just. And they are queuing up to tell you that you did vote for what's happening now, and that anyone like me who suggests that you didn't is patronising you, condescending to you, and misrepresenting you.
Well, what I've also had, I've had several people actually turn around to me and said to me, I bet you didn't vote Leave in the first place. You're just saying you voted Leave.
Well, that's why we've done the whole 3 hours on it today, because even if we had everyone at RADA currently pretending to be what you are clearly telling the truth about, we wouldn't be able to fill 3 hours.
I simply said to these people, just literally just go back through my timeline, read my tweets.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do is just go back, read my tweets, and you'll see what side of the argument I was on. But
you mentioned Andrea Leadsom playing a role in your... and now, of course, Andrea Leadsom is one of the leading exponents of the idea that you shouldn't be allowed to change your mind.
Yes,
do you mean
that's right, yeah.
Do you mean this, Andrea Leadsom?
I'm going to nail my colours to the mast here. I don't think the UK should leave the EU. I think it would be a disaster for our economy, and it would lead to a decade of economic and political uncertainty at a time when the tectonic plates of global success are moving.
Do you mean that, Andrea Leadsom?
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, well, turns out she's allowed to change her mind, Andy. I don't know what it is for the likes of you that somehow renders you not allowed to exercise that sort of privilege. Especially when it's her job to understand this stuff. I don't know what you do for a living, but I doubt it's your job to understand this stuff and explain it to the public.
Well, I mean, I work in the steel industry.
Oh.
So obviously, it's an industry I wanted to thrive, and I've worked in manufacturing for years, and I sort of believed that a future outside the EU would help that. And I look at what are the facts, not the lies that were peddled.
Or even the theories that are unprovable, because you can take them as relief to each other. So you can say, here's one theory and here's the other. And that's where you would be with the German car industry, for example. But they're not theories anymore. We know what the German car industry is or is not going to do with regard to our intent to leave the European Union. So that is now a fact. That has changed. What was a theory with a contradictory theory has become a fact that brooks no contradiction, but somehow they claim that you knew what you were voting for. That's what I think I'm getting most frustrated by at the moment, is this ludicrous claim that you voted for the polar opposite of what you were told would happen.
I mean, they say Leavers know what they voted for, but they don't. Parliament's proof of that. Parliament is absolute. Every Brexiteer in Parliament, if Leavers knew what they were voting for, they'd all be behind the same thing. They'd all say, we want this, but they don't. You've got some that want the WTO exit. You've got some that want,
You've got Gove and Johnson, the two flipping leaders, the two leaders of the whole shebang going through different lobbies on the only vote that they should have been able to have on the question of the withdrawal agreement. That's the only one that we're able to negotiate.
Exactly.
Andy,
exactly.
mate.
And I just want to say to you and every other person in this country that's listening who voted to remain in the European Union, that I am so sorry. I went the wrong way on this. I can see...
well, I want to say to you...
any project fear or anything. Project fear is project fact. I haven't been swayed on anything. But the information is out there, and people should make the effort. They should read it. I didn't when I should have done.
Well, nor did I. And that's why today's show is today's show, because all of these plausible, utterly nothing to do with racism or bigotry or immigration, millions of people with millions of reasons for doing something that, for the record, Andy, you have absolutely no need to apologise for. The people who persuaded you to go down that path, perhaps, have something to apologise for, but I'm so full of the joys of spring today that even they perhaps deserve a break. Maybe they were just wrong rather than actually being deliberately deceptive. Except Boris Johnson. We will be catching up with events in America before 1 o'clock. Simon Marks hopefully joining us after the next break, so shortly after 1:45, to examine what is clearly very good news for Donald Trump in the context of failure to find any evidence of collusion between him and the Russians. Inevitably, the report, or at least the Attorney General's précis of the report, contains the phrase something along the lines of he is not exonerated. So Donald Trump tweets within 2 minutes, this is a complete exoneration, which kind of suggests, regardless of what they found, people would probably have seen what they wanted to see. I think it's fairly clear that if Mueller had come out with lots of evidence of collusion, lots of people would claim it didn't matter, because lots of people have already claimed that they quite like Vladimir Putin. He's a lot more reliable than the denizens of the EU SSR. But I'm more interested, of course, in whether or not this marks a line in the sand for that part of American politics. It probably shouldn't, because any campaign riddled with criminals, of course, and which, for reasons as yet unexplained, the Russians were desperate to assist, clearly has a hell of a lot more questions to answer. But I have a feeling, and we'll find out from Simon Marks, who's a doyen of the chroniclers of such things, I think they probably will succeed in drawing a line in the sand on this, because Trump's been, once again, so clever in his corruption and making it all about collusion, not about obstruction, not about why they would meet with the Russians, simply about whether or not they could prove that Trump's people responded positively to the overtures from the Russians. Almost impossible to prove that, I would have thought, unless the Russians wanted it to be proved, if it happened. So that I think speaks once again to his sort of corrupt genius. It shouldn't be all about collusion. It should be all about why the Russians wanted to help him, why so many people closely allied with his campaign have been indicted, convicted and imprisoned, why the Russians were so keen to get meetings with his family members and key consiglieres. But it won't be, because this is what he's so clever at. But anyway, we'll talk about that shortly. In the meantime, back to this simple question of what's left now. You look at all the things that we were told in the run-up to that referendum, and oddly, when you look at the list of the people at Chequers this weekend, they're the ones whose pledges and promises and claims to understand have turned out to be false, wrong, mistaken. And yet still they're there, insisting that they get a go on the steering wheel. For the rest of us, if you believed that the German car industry would do this, or if you believed that unless we left we couldn't do that, or if you believed that we were somehow victim to this, and now you know we weren't, I think you've been horribly abandoned, actually, by both the public discourse and the political reality. And we are making amends in our own small way. Jeffrey's in Gravesend. Jeffrey, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Good afternoon, James. Pardon me. Just a couple of observations, really, if I may. Firstly, you no doubt seen Boris Johnson's Moses-like plea to let my people go.
Yeah.
I think it was more apt than he intended, in that the Israelites were then led into 40 years of in the wilderness, weren't they?
With a few other pretty grim experiences as well.
Well, this is the point. Yeah, apart from, beyond that, I was actually with you, along with many other people on Saturday. Families, pensioners, lots of kids, students. But you see people with their dogs and everything. There was nothing remotely menacing about any of this. We were just, good-natured people, enthusiastic, concerned about our country, but no threat to anyone whatsoever. And for that lady, Sarah Vine's comment, it's
about
just
lynching.
ludicrous. I don't. You'd have, if you want to feel hostility, go into a pub and actually defend. Try and defend your position against a posse of rabid Brexiters.
Well, I'm not devoid of experience. I may not have done it in a pub exactly, Jeffrey, but I'm not exactly devoid of running the gauntlet of rabid Brexiters. Of course, it's not a question of defending necessarily that is key. It's a question of asking the right questions, and when you do, it almost always falls apart. But of course, with the exception of the rabid constituency, when it does fall apart, I think that perhaps a mistake we've made is scoffing and gloating and laughing and pointing, whereas we should have just gone, could have easily happened to me, mate. There, but for the grace of God. And that's what today's show has been so interesting for.
I'll take that point, because it kind of, my first point clumsily dovetails in with a second, really. Go on. It was quite poignant. You seemed a little embarrassed about it, but our kin, our people,
our cousins and our kin. Yeah, I was a bit embarrassed because no one talks like that, Jeff.
But it doesn't matter. It summed up. To me, it summed up something very personal to me, really. Because I've had to avoid my sister and my niece since Saturday, because I know I will immediately I will sense this hostility, the aggression from them, this seething rage that I dared, challenge the doctrine.
Really? They're still kind of, yeah.
Yeah, all I get from them really is you were trying to have a discussion, just a calm, rational discussion, and it just.
So what would their key? Because this is a sad picture that you paint. If you were able to reach a point where they calmly explained what they voted for in 2016, what would they say, do you think?
It just comes. It's more of a feeling than anything else.
That's where it becomes impossible to debate.
We all know that the referendum was not an informed decision. It was an uninformed choice. It wasn't. You can't. It's a foolish democracy to have people make a choice on something they don't understand. As for my family, sadly, I've got to confess that many of them, immigration was the primary issue. Everything else about, I mean, who on earth that knew understood a thing about WTO?
Well, they now claim they all do, of course, and I don't want to sound dismissive,
this is the
but
problem,
they probably don't.
But thank you for the comment anyway, James.
I'm glad you liked it. Well, the crowd seemed to like it. It's just me that felt like a Herbert, Jeffrey. And if you don't know what Jeffrey and I are referring to, I gave a very brief speech on Saturday in Parliament Square, and I got a bit carried away with the moment. It was all so emotional and powerful, and I don't think I've ever been in front of a crowd like that before. So as I started saying stuff I've said to you a million times, these people, everyone we've spoken to today, our friends, our family, our Leave voters who were not rabid or racist or stupid or bigoted or blinded by propaganda surrounding immigration, the rest of them are our friends, our families, our colleagues. And from somewhere came the phrase, and bearing in mind this was on quite a big stage, from somewhere came the phrase, our cousins and our kin, which I'm very relieved to learn that Jeffrey found quite resonant, because quite a large part of me at the time, as those words came out of my mouth, that wondered where the heck they'd come from. Nigel is in Worcester. Nigel, what would you like to say?
Just really wanted to apologise, really.
Don't have anything to... Well, actually, I don't know what you're apologising for yet, but if it's for voting to leave, Nigel, you've got nothing to apologise for, mate. Not to me and not to anyone.
Yeah, I voted leave, and then I went on a bit of a journey, and now I'm very much in the Remainer camp and signing petitions and persuading anybody.
What nudged it? What changed? What made your needle move? That's becoming my new catchphrase, isn't it?
Well, I'd got a bit. I'd gone a bit Pete Gammon. I'd gone.
So we don't use that word anymore on the programme, because I got a talking to from someone who I care about who felt I was talking about him. So after it appeared on adverts for my book, I stopped using the word gammon, but I'm going to let you bring it back on this one occasion. Now I get it. I know what it means.
Yeah, I'd got very wound up. I was very patriotic.
Yes.
And, I thought it was the right thing to do for the country. I'd listened to Emmanuel Macron on Mar in the springtime, and he'd come across as very aggressive against our decision to leave.
Yes.
And I don't like the thought of being bullied, and it felt like that. But you asked me when I thought I started to change my mind, and it was pretty early on, because it's when the Gibraltar vote came in. I thought, oh my God, Gibraltar voted to remain. As I say, I thought
it's about 98% or something absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I thought I was being all patriotic.
Yes.
And then the two main culprits rocked up on TV the following day with no plan, looking like naughty schoolboys. I thought I've made one hell of a mistake, but although I thought I'd made a mistake, I was still very much in the Leave camp. I found it very hard to listen to any Remainers on social media or on the radio. I thought it was really quite a nasty period, really. But
it was.
By the autumn and the Christmas time, I'd been listening to you and the experts that you'd held in the program, just dismissing myth after myth.
And that's it. I mean, it's almost quite liberating just to go, oh yeah, all right, my bad. And what we've done is create this atmosphere where you found it so hard to move. And I've got a horrible feeling that some of us, possibly even I, might have been played by the other side by helping to create the environment in which we all felt entrenched and you felt you couldn't move.
No, I don't. I don't think you did. I think you've done more than probably anybody else to.
I hope so.
I mean, this programme
could always have done more, Nigel. That's how it works.
Okay, all right. Well, as I say, I just wanted to...
Oh, you're a star, mate.
Apologise and...
You're a star.
Say thank you.
Pint of Banks is in the Grape Shop next time I'm in Worcester.
I'll I'll take you up on that.
It's a deal. 12:47. I don't know if I'm going to have time to squeeze in a Gavin or a Mark or a Naveen or an Imran or a Jeremy or anyone else still waiting to talk. Thank you for being my Operation Brock, though. We've been stacking calls since 10 o'clock this morning in preparation for a no-deal Brexit, and every single one of them, I think bar two, with the brackets around old Philip in Hatfield, because we don't know whether he was acting in good faith or not. But it was actually a helpful opportunity to drive a coach and horses through all that hogwash about the Lisbon Treaty that might well be popping up in your Facebook feed without you knowing that it's been put there by bad actors, by liars, by propagandists. But other than that, every single one, essentially, and I hope you don't mind me using these words, intelligent, non-racist, articulate Leave voters who've changed their minds for the very simple reason that the stuff they thought was true about everything from the German car industry to our ability to make our own laws has turned out not to be true. How on earth can we continue to tell them that when the facts change, they're not allowed to change their mind? Ho-hum. Right, over the Atlantic now, into the, what is it, out of the frying pan into the fire, or from the sublime to the ridiculous? I'll let you decide, but Simon Marks is here, LBC's Washington correspondent, with what is, however you dress it up, Simon, a rather good day for Donald Trump.
Absolutely. However you dress it up, Donald Trump has something to celebrate, and that is that the Mueller report has concluded, according to the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, that there was no collusion between President Trump and his senior campaign aides on the one hand and the Russians on the other. And so the Mueller report, and again, no one outside the Department of Justice, as far as we know, has actually read the Mueller report yet. All we've seen is a 4-page précis of Robert Mueller's principal conclusions presented by the Attorney General William Barr. More about him in just a second. But as far as we can tell, it's very clear that Robert Mueller says he found no evidence to support claims of any kind of collusion or criminal conspiracy between the president and the Russians. That, of course, gives something for Donald Trump to celebrate. In characteristic mood, though, he wasn't feeling particularly charitable about the man, Robert Mueller, that he had previously accused of leading a witch hunt and a hoax.
This was an illegal takedown that failed. And hopefully somebody's going to be looking at the other side. So it's complete exoneration, no collusion, no obstruction. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The problem with that, of course, though, is that the president has totally falsely stated what the report has to say on the other principal issue that Robert Mueller investigated, namely obstruction of justice. You heard Donald Trump there saying that this report offered him complete exoneration. In fact, it says, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. And that exoneration specifically points to allegations that President Trump, when he fired the FBI Director James Comey, committed obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller did not take a view on that. He says it may have been a crime that was committed. He wasn't ready to bring charges against Donald Trump, so he left it up to the aforementioned Attorney General William Barr, recently appointed by Donald Trump, to make his decision. Now, bear in mind, James, Robert Mueller has wrestled with all of this for over 2 years, and at the end of the process said he could not confirm that Donald Trump had committed a crime, but equally he could not exonerate him. In less than 48 hours, the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, having read a report that no one else has been yet allowed to see, concluded that there was no need to pursue obstruction of justice charges against Donald Trump. It's that element to all of this that continues to make a hell of a stink.
Do we know when or if the report will be seen in its entirety by people other than William Barr and his closest associates?
No, we don't. It is up to the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, to decide just how much of this report to release to the public. He describes himself at the moment, and this is his word, not mine, as going through a process of scrubbing the report, particularly for any confidential information that it may contain relating to grand jury probes that took place here in Washington and elsewhere. So, at best, it's possible that the public will see see a scrubbed version of the report on Capitol Hill. Democrats in Congress, of course, are demanding the release of the full report, but it's not just Democrats making that demand. So too the editorial board of the normally reliably pro-Republican Wall Street Journal newspaper. They say the taxpayer, having footed the bill for all of this, the taxpayer has the right to read the report. But look, let's be absolutely clear. Terrific news for Donald Trump on the issue of any kind of Russian collusion. It does, on the face of it, allow him to put that issue behind him, but it does not allow him to put the issue of obstruction of justice behind him, nor does it overcome the myriad other investigations into his administration, his inauguration, his businesses that are taking place up on Capitol Hill, in New York, by federal prosecutors, in a whole host of other arenas.
It's got to be a fillip for the 2020 re-election campaign, though, given that a different verdict from Mueller would have arguably been curtains for it.
Oh, look, a different verdict from Mueller, we would be talking this morning about how quickly Donald Trump would have to exit the White House. And there is no doubt that staff around Donald Trump inside the White House and the president himself feel completely energized by all of this. They are absolutely sure that this helps them make the case for Donald Trump to be re-elected in 2020 and to get away from all of these nagging questions that have choked to a great degree the first term of his presidency. There's a big challenge in this for Democrats too, James, because Democrats now have to decide, do they carry on digging in the face of a president and a White House that has lied to the public about the outcome of the Mueller inquiry? They say it offers complete exoneration. It doesn't.
No,
do the Democrats keep digging away at that? You know, do they keep engaged?
But this is what, forgive me, we're going to run out of time.
Investigation.
Yeah, but that is, you're right, that is a key question, but that's what the whole fake news agenda is designed to deliver, isn't it? The ability for a president to stand up in public and describe a report that states this does not exonerate you. He can describe it as completely exonerating me, and no one knows what to do about it. Very briefly, because Sheila's up in 64 seconds, am I alone in wondering why the Russians were so keen to help? Because it's clear from the report, and indeed, actually, more pertinently, from the Attorney General's précis of the report, that they were making overtures galore. No one's denying that. The evidence they failed to find is the evidence that the overtures were accepted and acted upon. But if it was my country, I'd be terrified that the Russians were so keen to put into power the man that is currently in power.
Yes, I mean, that question remains unanswered, as also unanswered is the question, if all of the communications between Trump's team and the Russians were as pure as the driven snow, why did they all lie about them on so many occasions? I mean, these are big issues that perhaps we'll learn more about if and when we actually get to read the Mueller report. We certainly didn't learn much more about them from William Barr's précis of what Robert Mueller had written.
And Simon Marks brought in with 3 seconds to spare. Absolutely beautiful.